Rightio, we're on. Nikki, Kaye, welcome to the Luke Farr Show, a show to motivate, educate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Luke.
I guess first things first, for the people out there that do not know, I'm sure a lot of people do, but for anyone that doesn't, so you effectively served as deputy leader of the New Zealand National Party from May 2020 to July 2020. You served as the member of the New Zealand Parliament for the Auckland Central Electorate from 2008 until 2020. In January 2013, you were appointed to the Cabinet by Prime Minister John Kaye, giving you the portfolios of food safety, civil defence and youth affairs, and Associate Minister of Education and Immigration. In September 2016, you took sick leave from the House of Representatives for breast cancer treatment and returned to Parliament in early 2017 to resume full duties. And then you announced effectively on 16th of July 2020 you were leaving politics at the 2020 general election. You're currently director at AUT Ventures, a patron at McGuinness Institute, Te Hononga Waka, excuse my te reo, and investor and advisor of Aotea Energy. So you've done a few things. But Nikki, firstly, what motivated your decision way back then to enter politics? I mean, after especially studying law at Otago and a Bachelor of Science in Genetics.
Well, I mean, I came in pretty young, so I say to people, I grew up in Parliament. I mean, I was elected in 2008, but I started to stand for the candidacy in 2007. So I was 27, and so to be in Parliament from 27 to 40, firstly, was quite an extraordinary time in your life to be, I sort of woke up, particularly after, it was a pretty difficult situation with Todd from a mental health perspective, and I had no husband, no children. I had served and had an amazing set of opportunities to serve, and then had also been diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I was very clear with a range of people that I would stay in politics while I was needed, but because of that unusual health lens, it meant that I would only be there if I was needed, because I had that gave a really special sense of my own mortality and life. And so it was absolutely the right time for me to go. I can honestly say to you, I have not had one day where I have regretted that decision. I miss serving in the public.
What do you miss most about it?
What was that?
What do you miss the most about it?
Oh, COVID's been unusual in that I sort of pretty much went off the radar, but also have deliberately chosen less of a high profile to be involved in the political stuff. But I miss, I helped actually tens of thousands of constituents in Auckland Central, and every day you're making a phone call, writing a letter, and you can change the course of someone's life. So that is a pretty remarkable thing when you're in politics to be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk a little bit more about the political environment. I mean, obviously under constant scrutiny, always in the public eye, a lot of pressure. I mean, what tools and strategies did you use to cope with all of that pressure back then?
I can honestly say to you, Luke, well, firstly, I think there has been a bit of a change in the environment. So it's not even the same political environment that I kind of grew up in, if you like. And I could see some of that shift occurring, just, the 24-hour media cycle, the nature of people potentially reading only one stream of information rather than diverse networks. But what I can say to you is I actually found, one, I had a very good set of friends. I had a very good set of staff who they knew there were, when I needed to receive constructive criticism, but there's just some nasty stuff that occurs for which I learnt over time, I didn't actually need to read that. And so I put a few strategies in place to actually go, you know what, I don't need to read that. It's not going to fill my head with good stuff. But my overwhelming experience was was positive. So, I mean, I knocked on tens of thousands of doors. Most people, even if they don't agree with your politics, respect the fact that you're in a tough role. So there certainly is more trolling. There certainly is more abuse, in my view. There certainly is some other pressure of online stuff. But I think my experience in New Zealanders is very good.
Yeah, nice, great insights. Do you think that internal abuse and that sort of, chit chatter between parties there is a similarity in big corporates and organizations? That stuff all goes on. I mean, I've worked in the corporate world. That stuff does go on. Or do you think it's just really heightened because it is politics?
Oh, I think there's a couple of things. One is you probably get, the nature of politics, because you literally, these decisions can really make or break families. That's the nature of some stuff. And I'm not sure you get quite the intensity over a prolonged period of time in the corporate sector. So that'll be the first thing. So you do get, it's pretty big stakes. I think, though, you're right that there are, and I've certainly as well, before I went into politics, I was involved in a bank. You certainly get the internal politics or whatever that occurs. I think the difference is it's the nature of a small country is that you're in a goldfish bowl. So it just plays out publicly. But I do think it varies. It varies a bit with the leadership. It varies a bit with the cohort of MPs that you get in. And I sort of have, again, a bit of a simple view, which is those people that are focused on the job and those people that are overwhelmingly the majority of times when they speak to the public, they're speaking about policy issues, they do better. That is my broad view.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, you work very closely, obviously, with John Kaye. What would you say some of his strongest traits were as a leader?
Oh, look, he's an amazing human. I saw him recently, actually. And I've said to people before, John he is the all-rounder in terms of skills. So he was a communicator. He could do policy at high and lower levels. He could he could speak to anyone, had a heart of gold. And I think the thing that people, though, probably don't necessarily reflect on is that there's a vulnerability to John, and that was how he was able to look. Can we pause for a moment?
Sure.
You pause that. I've just got someone outside my house.
Oh, go for it. No, that's okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. Yeah, no worries. I'll take this actually opportunity, team, to whip into a small advertisement break for Autophagy Skincare Lightweight Moisturiser. You can check more out at www.autophagyskincare.com. But Nikki's back. Didn't have time for the full advert, but that's perfect timing. We've just whipped into an ad break, Nikki, but you're back now. Thanks for joining again.
See if I can get the light right.
That's okay. So we were on the John Kaye topic. Obviously, a natural ability to build rapport with a wide variety of personalities.
Yeah, but I think that his capacity, the way that he could, I think, emotionally connect with a number of people from different walks of life, is he was able to be very vulnerable at times, which I know sort of sounds a bit of a sexist thing to say, but you don't necessarily expect that from someone who is not only a very successful business leader, very successful prime minister. And so John had the ability, I think, to have authenticity and connection with a whole group of people from different walks of life. And I truly believe that was his fundamental strength. And he also, when it came to the cabinet, he brought together a diverse group of kind of thinkers. I was the liberal blue-green from Auckland Central, and he would ask my view, but he would also ask Jerry Brownlee's view from Ireland. And to be able to kind of navigate and listen fairly to the different perspectives, I think is a mark of great leadership.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And speaking of Jerry Brownlee, he wasn't too keen on your opposed view on the stop mining on Great Barrier, was he?
Yeah, that was a bit of a difficult time, but it was, I sort of say to people, and I nearly lost my political career. It was nearly a very short political career. But basically, I had campaigned on being a guardian of conservation and the hierarchy goals. So the idea that I would write in as soon as I got into Parliament, then argue for what I thought was kind of destruction of some core important conservation land on Great Barrier was not something that I felt I'd ever have integrity with the constituents of Auckland Central. I didn't feel like there are certain issues, and I remember a long-standing right-wing politician. She said to me, "Look, Nikki, I'm sorry, but sometimes these critical issues will come at you, and you've got to make the call of integrity." And I did.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that.
Bit gutsy.
Yeah, I think that's your reputation, and look, anyone that's gutsy, it's admirable for sure. Now, look, I don't want to talk politics this whole interview, but I do want to get your feedback around Labour. I mean, in your opinion, what do you think they've actually achieved in the last 4 years, if anything?
Oh, look, I mean, I as I sort of have bowed out, if anything, I'm more understanding of every government has a set of challenges, and I do think the global pandemic, I'm a former civil defence minister, was incredibly difficult. And so part of what we're seeing is there's a level of mental health, there's a level of people who haven't got through the health system, you've got breakups going on. There's a whole, because when you have an earthquake or a tsunami, you can see the destruction. But after a global pandemic, there's a whole lot of kind of invisible stuff. So I can only give comments in the context of that pandemic. I think it is a very difficult time. I do think there's been some environmental initiatives that they have progressed the other day. There were a range of announcements that had been in the works for really 10 years over successive governments in the area of marine reserves, for instance, which I think was pretty positive. I think in the context of the global pandemic as well, they put forward a group of support packages. I mean, they weren't perfect, but that was still, it's what we did when we were doing the Canterbury earthquakes. So I think there will inevitably be initiatives. Part of what's also playing out, though, is I think people's expectations were very high. And it would be one thing I would just note is that I think that when you're going into a campaign, and obviously Jacinda had huge admiration and was very much, got an extraordinary result. So I think that this combination of high expectations on policy delivery, then the global pandemic hit, and then, people have kind of gone that sort of two-prong hit, which is, well, I don't think you delivered on what you said you're going to do, and then the global pandemics, I'm feeling pretty crap, basically.
Yeah, touche. And I mean, look, catastrophic times and very emotionally challenging for a lot of New Zealanders and nonetheless businesses. What do you think, Nikki, though, collectively as a nation and as New Zealanders, we took out of all that? What do you think some of the number one biggest learning on a positive sense was from something so horrific like that?
Well, I think the verdict is there's a COVID inquiry that's supposed to come out, but I would hope, I think the first thing would be, as a small nation, whether it was closing the borders or a few other things that we did, we can move quite fast actually when we want to. And so that gives me hope on a range of areas when I travel the world and visit other countries, is that when we sort of get a bit grumpy with aspects of our society, we need to remember we are small and we can move and we can do reform very quickly if we want to. That's the first thing. And we did, and people admired us in terms of COVID, that we just initially, in the initial phase, moved quickly. I think the second thing is that we also, and it's sort of aligned with that, can, when we want to, have the private sector and the public sector and the community sector work, and I've seen this as a former civil defence minister, working in unison if we want to. Again, I personally think there's a lot more to be done in that area. It will be a competitive advantage of our country. I'm very passionate about the environment, for instance, in the area of ocean and coastal regeneration. And I personally think we have the opportunity to restore a whole lot of communities, also create a lot of economic opportunities, but only by the philanthropic, private, and government sector working together. I mean, I think the other thing that I'd say in terms of just like a positive for me is that, our health workers, and I feel very, very strongly in part because I'm still a patient in the health system, they are extraordinary. They need more resource. They need a lot more help and support. But one day, if someone writes the books that should be written about some of those people who stepped up and some of those people who have stepped up during COVID, like in the cancer world, and then are now dealing with a backlog of people. Yeah, I mean, I think we've got some extraordinary health professionals in New Zealand.
Yeah, I agree. Rob Campbell could write a pretty good book, don't you think?
Yes, yeah. And I mean, that, the issues that Rob raised, I mean, I think this sort of capacity to have meaningful reform, but investment in the front line and what that looks like and quickly.
You and Rob share a similar characteristic. Rob actually came on the show, and it's the guts, it's the authenticity and having the guts to speak out.
Yeah. Well, he's definitely doing that. I think I would generally say, look, we need to make sure we continue to have a society where people can feel that they can do that at different levels. It's always hard depending on what role you're in, but I also think, I mean, on that vein, that I'm a patron, obviously, of the McGuinness Institute, but I think this capacity to continue to grow independent policy think tanks so that we have a good check on, it's not just government making policy, it's also other people contributing into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about, it's interesting to see so many politicians transition after their careers in politics. What do you think it's just by osmosis that anyone that's had a successful career in politics, every organization and business just want you on board? I mean, we could name multiple politicians globally, and it's just from an advocacy point of view or board of directors. But let's put it this way: anyone that's had a successful career in politics is well sought after in the corporate world. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think everybody has a bit of a different road talking to ex-politicians. I mean, I chose a more unconventional road in that, one, I wanted to have a good break, and that's partly the lens of the health stuff. I was like, I've been a workaholic. Part of the lesson of my life is to learn not to be a workaholic. So at a personal level, I was, and people think I live in the bush on Great Barrier in part because there was a couple of articles, but I certainly are very, very focused on having balance. And so I took a decent break. I'm on the board of AUT Ventures, which is a startup world. I have an O1 visa for the United States in the area of EdTech, and then now building this energy company. And then I'm involved in building an environmental education trust in the area of ocean and coastal regeneration. Now, for me, I was lucky to have the capacity to say, what is my life purpose? And in my view, it's the environment and education. And I was lucky to take the time not to necessarily go on all the flashboards, except for obviously AUT, but to be able to build some things, like be involved with Tama and AUT Energy and build this trust. But everyone takes a different road, and some people, they want to do all the corporate boards and stuff. So
yeah, nice insights. And back to you, living in the bush. Do you actually live in the bush, or?
No, I don't. I've been in a bit of a. I should have my pods on my land on Great Barrier by Christmas, but it's been about an 18-month journey, which is an interesting experience in terms of.
That's good, and I'm sure as journalists, what they just meant. I mean, Great Barrier is majority bush, so if you're on Great Barrier, they simplified that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I certainly the Barrier is an amazing place. It's a cool place.
Yeah. Yeah, my parents actually had property there many moons ago. Anyhow, as a New Zealander, what are you the most proud of?
I think we have a history of leaders who have been brave and innovative, and I don't think that matters whether it's sport. Some of our sailors, whether it's bloody Sir Edmund Hillary, Sir Peter Blake, Sir Paul Callahan, but they all share this sort of, I think, very innovative, can think outside the square, are very brave, and have thought quite globally. And so I think I'm really proud of that, because I think a country that can produce those people, I would like to see more of that. And I think, I've had some interesting reflections on the sort of cultural side of New Zealand, and I think, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is ensuring that young people know, particularly with the rise of mental health and a whole lot of other things, that failure is an integral part of learning and being successful, and that you cannot be successful unless you are constantly failing, and let's use that term, but prepared to change, and you're falling down and you're getting back up. And so, I mean, I don't know anyone I've met lots of different public figures in New Zealand and globally, in business, community, the creative sector, environment. I don't know any of them that ever talk about like perfection and they've had a perfect run. They've all had things that have not gone well. And so I think if we want to have more young people and more people at different levels of society, then we need to talk differently around what happens when people don't do so well but might have leadership opportunities in the future. And I can say personally, in my leadership journey, I was very lucky when I was at school. I wanted to leave to go somewhere else, and this principal came in and said, "Nah, I reckon you've got leadership potential." That changed the trajectory of my life. I think bowing out and what was pretty difficult with Todd having a mental health breakdown gave me, I saw some stuff I wasn't that happy with in terms of New Zealand as well, and experienced some stuff I hadn't experienced before. But I know other people have had a bit of a similar ride. So I think this capacity to continue to support those people that are prepared to have the courage to change things, even if it's a bit messy.
Yeah, I like that. And what do you think drives our very strong cool poppy syndrome culture here in New Zealand? And also, do you think that's correlated to our the fact that we've got the second highest youth suicide rates in the OECD? And I mean, there's got to be a correlation with the tall poppy syndrome.
I don't like to use the term tall poppy again, because I've found so many New Zealanders who are supportive of success. But you see, that's why I say that my thing is, I think a lot of people are supportive of success. It's when someone has a little fall that maybe there just isn't the kind of compassion and consideration of the long-term view of that person, which is something different. I mean, the thing I would say in terms of the youth mental health, both around suicide but also self-harming, we're seeing an increase in self-harm of young women. I think you've got multiple things going on there. I think we've got intergenerational sexual abuse and domestic violence. I think that is one of the most significant things that we need to consider in terms of social investment. Inevitably, that has an impact on mental health. I think that a lot of people are experiencing more loneliness than ever before, and we need to think about that, particularly in the context of young people on their screens and not having deep emotional connection. And then I think a lot of people with COVID they're under pressure. They're under pressure financially. They're under pressure because their parents maybe are sick and they can't get through the health system. And so it's cumulative. And so it's being able to do little bits in terms of government to make things easier for people. And I also would say, in that vein, people need some things to look forward to, like separate to government policy. I think the way that being aware in the way that we treat each other. And look, I actually think there's the powering up that needs to happen over the coming couple of years is, and this is crucial after a pandemic where you have a lack of social cohesion, often you get a reduction. We do need to have more things that enable people to work together at a community level, because that is the antidote to a breakdown in social cohesion.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned back there, Nikki, earlier around that you and your personal experience that you've dealt with many New Zealanders that do celebrate success. Do you think that's actually the majority and not minority? And do you think our brand of New Zealanders having a high level of tall poppy is absolutely incorrect?
Well, I think that there is this issue of failure and how maybe we deal with failure. I don't really agree with the characterization of tall poppy, but I would say there's a couple of things. One is, overwhelmingly, I think most New Zealanders, and that's been my experience, are quite fair-minded, and they're able to cut through, I don't know whether I'm allowed to say it on your show, but the bullshit. They can,
you are. Yes.
they can cut through.
You can say whatever you like. Very honest show here, Nikki.
Any New Zealanders is authenticity. That's my sort of experience. But what I would say, what I think is happening at the moment is a lot of people are in survival mode. So if there is a bit of different behaviour, and you often see this post civil defence emergencies, is that maybe a little bit of what's happening at the moment is there people aren't maybe necessarily being themselves at times because they're in survival mode. And I've certainly, I sort of still am out and about in the community, and I just hear people and see things and watch. And I think particularly the financial stuff, just a bit, again, which I think is happening globally, but so that is.
Are you still knocking on 10,000 doors, Nikki? Now that you're
no, I'm not out there.
When you said you're out and about the community, I thought, oh wow, that's someone that really lives and breathes politics.
No. When you leave, you leave. I don't just do some like fantasy door knocking. No.
Fantasy door knocking. That could be a video game.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very good. What you once mentioned there that after doing some homework on you, that we can't keep thinking we're world leading in some areas in New Zealand. What areas do you think that we are world leading in, and why are we simply not?
Well, I've found it pleasantly pretty awesome to spend time in the environmental area, but particularly energy. And I think we've got some really innovative energy leaders. And I reckon that I'm biased around the stuff that I'm doing, but there's just we're pioneering the era of microgrids, but there's people across the energy sector, companies, New Zealand companies, doing some pretty extraordinary stuff. I actually think in the area of health and education, again, because I've been doing a bit of work internationally in the area of education technology, we have quite a lot of intellectual policy tied up in health and education and social policy, for which some other countries would love to have that. And we need to think better how we export that, some of that health and education knowledge, but also through innovative New Zealand companies. I certainly have had that experience of meeting some amazing ones in ed tech. The other thing that I'd say, you look at, I'm involved in AUT Ventures, but I've spent time at the Ice House, some of the Ice House events. And yeah, we are we are becoming pretty serious players in some of the companies that are coming out of New Zealand. So I think these are things to be proud of. Take the space industry. Yeah, but I think the bits that we need to work on, which is kind of the flip side of that, is we clearly have some long-standing issues around mental health. We have housing affordability, and I'd argue we can't keep saying we're world leading on the environment unless we do some things a bit differently.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We're certainly, once we get into the thick of it, we're not exactly the clean green image that we claim. But anyhow, I also once read right that you are cautious, serious, and dutiful, and probably partly by nature and partly because we do get the impression that you're keeping a careful eye on yourself. And that also read that you're the minister least likely to muck up. What's your take on that?
Well, again,
pretty good testimonial, Nikki.
I feel like I've lived 10 lives since I left politics. So this is the thing I say to people, being an ex-public figure, in part because I haven't probably been out and about as much in the last couple of years, it's like being frozen in time, because at the moment, all anyone wants to talk to me about is the election, but I feel like I've lived 10 lives. So I think I probably, when I was in the building, I was a young politician. So I felt enormous responsibility. I won the seat of Auckland Central and then to hold it against Jacinda. And I was the youngest woman that National had ever had in the cabinet. So I felt this extra level of responsibility to not muck up, probably. And probably that manifested itself in 100-hour weeks, which maybe helped me get sick. So now I
may or may not have something to do with it. Yeah,
I think I'm probably, the fact that I've gone into two effectively startups, one in renewable energy, but then also this new ecosystem that I'm creating around Blue Nature, indicates more appetite for risk. And part of that's the mortality thing, which is, a lot of ex-politicians don't want to do that. They don't want to be anywhere near risk. But I'm kind of, I might have a few years on this planet. I might have a few decades, and I still want to make impact. And so that requires you to sort of pin your ears back and go for it.
Give it a nudge. Yeah. Absolutely love it. And I do want to touch on that before we wrap up, but receiving any type of cancer diagnosis is extremely emotional and absolutely traumatic for any human. I mean, how did the state of your mindset get you through some of the most darkest days, Nikki?
Oh, well, I think I've had good health in that I started seeing someone when I was diagnosed, because it's been pretty gnarly, like my health is not perfect. And that person, gave me some really good techniques as well. I think the second part is, if you know anyone who has had a life-threatening illness, then often, and sometimes it fades with people and they forget and they get back into their daily life, but because mine has not been perfect, it's remained front of mind. But often a lot of stuff melts away, and that certainly has happened with me. I think of the person I was before I was diagnosed at 36, and I think of who I am at 43. And I do not worry about 90% of the stuff that I used to worry about before. And it's a gift in that, and I feel super lucky to have that gift.
What are some examples there of just some of the small stuff you used to worry about that you just don't?
Well, you just, you just this sort of sense of like things you've said, or like even within your close relationships, or when difficult things occur just around, I don't know, your house, or it's just like 90%.
You just simply let it all go. You just let those go.
The admin of life, you actually think about and you analyze your thoughts. It might be 90%. And I mean, it's so cheesy, but my grandmother used to say to me, darling, and she was in her 90s, nothing matters. And I remember I was a minister at the time, and I was like, that's ridiculous. I'm dealing with all these big stuff and all of these things. But a lot of people, when they get to the end of their life, or close to the end, it's a couple of very close relationships, probably that you've done something that you care about, some form of vocation, but there's not that much more. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think, and I used to, but it doesn't mean you don't have self-respect and you don't care about the way that you treat people, which I think is really important. But it doesn't matter. If a lot of people realized that when they're spending a lot of time thinking about social media and all of that stuff, it doesn't matter.
Oh my God, the guy doesn't like the dress I just posted. I didn't get those 100 likes. Yeah, and I agree. There's a lovely quote, isn't there? The people that mind don't matter, and the people that matter don't mind, and the people that mind don't matter. And that's so true. Very good. Hey, let's quickly talk about Brené Brown. Brené Brown, great author around emotional intelligence, and then also Adam Grant on psychology.
Yes.
For the youth out there, or actually not just for the youth, actually let's switch it up, just for any human out there, how can one go about strengthening their EQ, their emotional intelligence?
I think there's, one, learning from people who understand this stuff. And so like Brené Brown's a good example, but I had never really thought about the concept of shame. She writes a lot on shame, and so I think being hungry to listen to content, whether it's podcast or books that enable you to understand psychology, like I think that's quite important. So take the time. I think the second part that, again, probably as an ex-politician, people might find hard to believe, but listening.
There's a little bit of irony there. Yeah, the ha-ha moment there.
Yeah, well, and I can talk off the best of the times, but learning to listen and be a really active listener will inevitably strengthen your emotional intelligence. And then also, I was reading the other day about like the largest, or one of the single biggest factors in a young person's kind of trajectory is their reference group. Have you read that? So so I think I sort of, for me, intuitively, all of that makes sense. So, and it's, it's all stuff my grandmother told me, but like, be intentional as to who you spend time with and who you learn from, and so who those close friends are, those close relationships, because if they don't have EQ and they are sort of less aware or less caring, then that's going to rub off on you.
You're the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time around. I agree with that 100%. I always thought John Kaye was a fantastic active listener.
I think that's true. I do think, I remember he would sometimes come to the cabinet table, and if a minister had said something that he thought was completely ridiculous, he would be able to name the person that he had spoke to. And so, I mean, I have memories of him saying, Janet at Te Awamutu, hair salon doesn't agree with you. Like, So,
right. So it's not. So it's a third party.
well, yeah, but
rebuttal.
but he had the capacity to remember people and their stories, and be able to sort of play that off as to the officials and what their advice was or what policy was coming up.
Yeah, rather than his direct opinion on it. Yeah, very, very smart strategic approach here. That's great. Hey, I wish we had time to talk more about your experience as a teenager on the island for the TV show, but we'll touch on that another time. But Nikki, Kaye, thank you so much for coming on the Luke Farr Show, a show to motivate, educate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. Very great insights, and just want to thank you again for coming on.
Thanks very much, Luke. Okay.
I'll just hit stop record.